Hey gamers, Chris here. This is Treantmonk's Temple where knowledge is power. Today we are going to be doing a guide video and a build video. We're going to be building a character from level 1 and we're going to take it right to level 20 together. This is going to be my first guide video. We're going to be doing the subclass Trickery Cleric. Now the reason why I'm going to be doing a build for Trickery Clerics first is because I think it is the most underrated subclass in all of D&D. And that's a pretty big claim. The thing about Trickery Clerics is there seems to be this consensus that they're the worst subclass for clerics. I happen to think they're the best subclass for clerics. Maybe not from levels 1 through 20, but certainly at the levels that are going to see the most play in most campaigns. So for that reason, I think it's the best cleric subclass overall. So obviously my opinions and the common consensus are way apart here. So I need to take a deep dive into this, see what people are concerned about with the Trickery Cleric, see if there's ways we can navigate those concerns, because when I looked at those concerns, a lot of them are valid, but there's some conclusions drawn from those concerns that I don't think are valid. There's also some ways to navigate those concerns that I don't think are considered. So today we are going to do all those things. So the way I'm going to end up putting this video together is we're going to start out by talking about what people's opinions are of the Trickery Cleric, and we're going to start looking at each ability of the Trickery Cleric, and we're going to compare it to what we would see maybe in another subclass for Cleric, and we're going to discuss the specific concerns and my opinions of those abilities myself and why I don't think those concerns are anything to be overly concerned about. Finally, we're going to do the build, and we're going to take it from level 1 through 20, and I'll be giving advice as we go. There's more than one way to build a good cleric, so I'm going to make one selection, but I'm going to discuss what other selections you might want to consider. Let's get started. Trickery Clerics. Trickery is just terrible. Am I missing something here? One of the first characters I played was a Trickster Cleric, and I know it's awful for what we think it's supposed to do. Whew. I got a big job in front of me. People just don't like this subclass. Well, Trickery is established as bad. Established means there's been evidence placed before us. So let's examine that evidence and let's see if we draw the same conclusions that this poster drew based on those criticisms. So as we go into discussing these abilities, let's discuss some generalities about clerics. Number one, you need to understand that clerics are one of those classes that are bonus action hungry. There's so much they can do with their bonus actions. It starts right at level 1 with Healing Word, and then by level 3 we're talking about Spiritual Weapon, which is one of the best spells in the game at that level, using your bonus action every round. Then of course there's more bonus actions beyond that, including subclass abilities. So it's important to understand as we build this cleric that bonus actions, once again, are not free actions. We have to consider the various things we can do with a bonus action. Second thing to understand is there's a pretty established combo with clerics that is going to really come into play starting at 5th level, and it's going to continue for several levels after that, maybe for your entire campaign. And that is the combo of, in round 1, casting Spirit Guardians, and in round 2, then you cast Spiritual Weapon, and then you either use a weapon or an attack cantrip. So you basically have 3 sources of damage that are occurring every round, and none of them are huge on their own, but added together it's pretty significant. And this really becomes the staple of most cleric characters, combining these 3 things to bring a reasonable amount of damage, a fair bit to one single target and then some to an area around them. It's also important to note that Spirit Guardian scales well. So as we go up in levels beyond level 5, we'll be using our 4th, our 5th, our 6th level slots potentially for casting Spirit Guardians a lot of the time, because we get something back for that that's worthwhile. Now, Spiritual Weapon also scales, not nearly as well, but it's also important to remember that especially if you're fighting something like a single target, it may be worth it because there's a lot less risk involved because we're not worrying about our concentration. The next thing to understand is that clerics tend to be one of the most potent classes at lower levels, and then they lose some of that luster at the higher levels. Clerics have some spells that are super potent at low levels. I mean, right from level 1, you walk in with Bless and Healing Word. These are both really good spells. With your level 2 spells, you're getting Spiritual Weapon, one of the best second level spells in the game. At level 3 spells, you're talking about Spirit Guardians, one of the best third level spells in the game. And these spells can work together, which makes them complementary, which is even better. And so it makes clerics quite potent at lower levels. But the cleric spell list starts to lose a lot of its luster after level 3. So once we get to 4th level spells, right through 9th level spells, there's still good spells on those lists. But compared to the other major spellcasters, I find that they're not quite as good. So it really does make clerics strong, strong, strong from levels 1 through 5, level 6. Then by level 7, we start to see other spellcasters maybe looking a little bit stronger. Finally, we need to understand that not all clerics use their action in the same way. Some clerics use a ranged weapon, others will use a weapon and a shield, and yet others will use a shield and an attack cantrip as their non-leveled spell actions during combat. I tend to favor the latter, and there's 3 reasons for that. The first is that with a cleric, if we're using a weapon, we're talking about a single weapon attack. So we're not talking about a lot of damage. So when we're using a weapon, we're also using usually our dex or our strength, unless we have something like Shillelagh. And Shillelagh's using that bonus action, and we talked about bonus actions already. So we end up not doing a lot of damage with that weapon, so we're not getting a lot out of it. Now, I understand a lot of people use a booming blade or green flame blade with their weapon. This does add a certain amount to the damage, not a lot at the low levels. It's a lot more at the higher levels. But at the higher levels, we haven't raised our strength or our dexterity, so we're not hitting nearly as often. And there's less damage added from those ability scores. So again, we're not getting a huge amount out of that single weapon attack. Number 2, if we're using that weapon and shield, we're going to have some difficulty with casting some spells. Spells that have a somatic component but no material component can't be cast, and spells that have a material component that's consumed or a material component that has cost, that can't be cast either. This includes things like our Cure Wounds spells or protection from good and evil spells. So there are some limitations in play, and we can just avoid those by having a free hand and casting a cantrip instead. Now, there are some ways to mitigate that. Warcaster feat will allow you to take care of your somatic component, and then of course you can always sheath a weapon and then cast a spell, but you can't draw that weapon on the same round. Now, there's some people who say that you can drop the weapon on the ground and then use your interact with an object to pick it up. Some DMs may allow this. Jeremy Crawford has said he would allow somebody to drop a weapon without it considering it their interact with an object for the round. Now, if I was the DM, I gotta say, if somebody tells me that it's going to take less time for them to drop a weapon on their ground and then reach down and pick it up off the ground than to sheath a weapon and then draw it again, I think I might be a hard sell on that one. Third is range versatility. Cleric cantrips, there's really 2 cantrips that you could expect a cleric to be casting in combat. That would be Sacred Flame and Toll the Dead. Each of those cantrips can be cast in melee, they can be cast at range, they can be cast at creatures behind cover without penalties, they can be cast at creatures who we might have disadvantage to attack on, all these various things. Now, neither of these cantrips are going to deliver a great amount of damage. Cantrips don't do a lot of damage, but you know what? Weapons don't do a lot of damage when you're a cleric either, because you're attacking once. Now, we look at clerics, one thing I've found about clerics is that when people are evaluating them, they look at that level 8 ability, because all clerics get one of 2 abilities at level 8. They either get Divine Strike or potent spellcasting. Now, what Divine Strike does is it adds a d8 to weapon damage, and the type of damage will vary from subclass to subclass. And that eventually becomes a 2d8 at a high level. I think it's 14th level. Then Potent Spellcasting will add your spellcasting ability modifier to cantrip damage. So that will usually end up being a +5 damage to cantrip damage. And the way these clerics end up getting categorized is if they have the potent spellcasting, then they're a spellcasting cleric, like a light cleric or a knowledge cleric. And then if they have the divine strike, they're therefore a weapon cleric, and they should be using a weapon to take advantage of that. The thing I'd point out, though, is before level 8, it makes no difference, right? There's no reason why a cleric that gets divine strike wouldn't use a cantrip in favor of a weapon from levels 1 through 7. They're not getting any advantage with it at all. The only point where it makes a difference at all is level 8. And the thing to keep in mind too is at level 8, that regular action, we're getting into higher levels. So less and less and less, we're going to be relying on a weapon attack or a cantrip with that action. And that just gets more so as we get to higher levels. So these abilities, I think we put too much emphasis on them. I don't think there's any reason why a cleric with Divine Strike shouldn't be using cantrips instead of weapons. That D8, it's just not enough in my opinion. It's coming in too late and it's too little. So let's look at the abilities of a Trickery Cleric one at a time. We're going to discuss what the criticisms are, and we're going to take a look at what we might see in another subclass. The subclass I've chosen to compare it to is the Arcana subclass, because the Arcana subclass is one that a lot of people consider to be the best cleric subclass of them all. So I think it's a good one to compare it to see just how much worse is the Trickery Cleric than the Arcana Cleric. So the first level ability of the Trickery Cleric is Blessing of the Trickster. This is exactly what Blessing of the Trickster does. Starting when you choose this domain at first level, you can use your action to touch a willing creature other than yourself to give it an advantage on dexterity stealth checks. This blessing lasts for 1 hour or until you use this feature again. To me, that sounds reasonably good. What are the criticisms? And the first one would be, the problem is it's all tricksters get at level 1, which is hilariously little compared to any other domain. What they're really referring to is that other clerics will get more than one ability at level 1. Usually it's some ability plus heavy armor and or martial weapon proficiencies. Now, heavy armor and martial weapon proficiencies, you can have them. I'm sorry. Heavy armor, that's what, going to be maybe 1 extra AC, and martial weapon proficiencies, 1 or 2 points of damage if you're using a weapon. Am I going to be using a weapon? Not most of the time. I mean, if I'm a cleric, I'm going to own a weapon. I will probably use it some of the time. I'll probably have a crossbow too to use at range. But a crossbow is no worse than a bow if you're only attacking once a round. So I really don't see why that's a big loss. So we're really just talking about this one ability. And unlike other clerics that often are limited in the number of times that those abilities can be used, this can be used all the time. And it's a 1 hour duration. That means you can have it up on an ally 24 hours a day if you want. And if your ally is a rogue or anyone who uses stealth, they'll love you for it. Of course, if you're doing a group stealth check, then maybe the rogue isn't the one you're going to put this on. Maybe you're going to switch it now to the paladin, for example, who might be using heavy armor and would normally be facing disadvantage. And now you can remove that disadvantage. I can see uses for this. Here's another one. The ability itself is basically a more focused version of guidance that you can't use on yourself. I don't think this is a good criticism at all. This was actually from a cleric guide. And the thing about guidance and this ability is they're not in competition. In fact, they're complementary. I can give somebody guidance and this ability. So now they have advantage on stealth rolls and a D4. That's really good. Or if I want to buff more than one person, I might use Blessing of the Trickster on another character, and I might use the guidance on myself or on another character, so that 2 characters have bonuses to stealth. Furthermore, this doesn't use concentration, guidance does. Furthermore, this lasts an hour, guidance lasts a minute. there are lots of reasons why this is better than guidance for stealth. Now, guidance is better in terms of the versatility because it can be used for any ability check. But when we're talking about stealth, Blessing of the Trickster, number one, is better, and number two, it's complementary with guidance, which is good. You turn somebody in your party into a stealth expert. If they're already an expert, you make them almost unbeatable in stealth. The Arcana Cleric gets 2 wizard cantrips and the Arcana skill proficiency. Now, the skill proficiency is okay. It's based on intelligence, which probably isn't your best bet, but I'll always take another skill proficiency. The 2 cantrips, that's really good. If it was me, I think I would look at Prestidigitation, which is useful in a number of little circumstances, and then I might take maybe a ranged cantrip like Ray of Frost or something, just to add a little bit more versatility. Both good things to have, neither of them overwhelmingly powerful. Now, what a lot of people love with this is they can take Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade, and then now both those cantrips are treated as cleric cantrips. And people go nuts over this. Again, I don't think you're going to see a lot of damage from a single weapon attack, especially before level 5, even with these cantrips. And by the time you get to level 8, and now you're adding your potent spellcasting, and now these cantrips have scaled once, they're going to do okay damage when they hit. Again, you're not going to hit as much as you can expect other characters to hit because you're going to be using an ability score that isn't your best ability score. And just trust me, don't raise that other ability score. Raise your wisdom. Furthermore, you're stuck in melee, or if you can't get to melee, then you're stuck not using these abilities. So again, I can absolutely see how they're going to add damage to your character. I just don't think they're going to add an overwhelming amount of damage. Not enough that we should be overwhelmed by this. I mean, I'm not overwhelmed by this. I'm whelmed.
I'm a little overwhelmed.
You're overwhelmed. Freeze was underwhelmed. Why isn't anyone ever just whelmed?
This brings us to our second level ability, which is alternate to our channel divinity. So if we're not going to be turning undead, our other option is Invoke Duplicity. Now here's what Invoke Duplicity does. Starting at second level, you can use your channel divinity to create an illusionary duplicate of yourself. As an action, you create a perfect illusion of yourself that lasts for 1 minute or until you lose your concentration, as if you were concentrating on a spell. The illusion appears in an unoccupied space you can see within 30 feet of you. As a bonus action on your turn, you can move the illusion up to 30 feet to a space you can see, but it will remain within 120 feet of you. For the duration, you can cast spells as though you were in the illusion space, but you must use your own senses. Additionally, when both you and your illusion are within 5 feet of a creature that can see the illusion, you have advantage on attack rolls against the creature, given how distracting the illusion is to the target. Okay, so you're creating an illusionary duplicate of yourself. Takes an action, takes your concentration, it's going to use up bonus actions. This is a lot of stuff. Let's see what people say about it. So the first criticism I read was regarding the unlisted uses of Invoke Duplicity, such as confusing enemies, absorbing attacks, etc. This is extremely DM dependent, given how little info the feature gives you. Yeah, that's true. That's true of any illusion spell. Take a look at Silent Image. If you make a silent image of yourself, is it reasonable to expect an enemy might confuse that illusion for you? Yeah, I think it's reasonable, but the spell doesn't specifically say they will. If a DM chooses to say that the enemy creature knows that's the illusion and knows which one's the real you, then it's not going to work. So, sure, DMs can just choose to screw you here, because illusions don't tell you exactly how the enemy will respond. The idea that this ability in particular is vague is simply not true. This is an illusion ability. Illusion abilities are vague. Illusion abilities require the DM to be playing along with you to some degree. Do I think something that's described as a perfect duplicate of yourself should be confusable for your character? Of course. It makes perfect sense to me. Now, would every single DM think the same thing? Not necessarily. Anytime you're going to make a character that's going to be using illusions, it doesn't hurt to have a conversation with your DM to see how they respond to illusions. They'll usually tell you outside of gameplay. If that's going to be a problem, then don't use it that way. Personally, if I'm using this ability, my intention is to draw away attacks from myself and other party members. And that's the way I would try to use this. There are DMs in the world who wouldn't let me do that. I get that. I think most reasonable DMs would. Just as most reasonable DMs treat illusions in a reasonable way. But some DMs don't. And when they don't, this isn't going to work. Now, as for providing you advantage in combat, I can see maybe using that with spiritual weapon, especially if I'm not level 3 yet, so I'm not going to be concentrating on Spirit Guardians. But because this requires bonus action to move, and my spiritual weapon is requiring a bonus action to attack, I can see some potential conflict in just setting this up in the first place. And since I'm not using a weapon in combat, it's not really giving me anything there either. So you know what? I'll just ignore that part of it. No big deal. This is a perfect illusionary duplicate of myself that I can create as an action and move around. That's as good as a silent image as far as I'm concerned, or what I would primarily use silent image for in combat. So that's what this is, and it does it decently. So let's consider some of the reasons people don't like this ability. The first one I'm going to bring up, then again, this isn't much more utility than a basic familiar, except it's slow and it requires the caster's bonus actions to move. Oh, and it can't perform the help action in combat or grant allies advantage. Oh, and again, it costs your concentration. Yeah, this is not a fine familiar. Fine familiars are great, and they're great for delivering touch spells. One thing about this is if you want to deliver a touch spell, if that touch spell requires an attack roll, you can use your invoked duplicity and yourself to grant yourself advantage on that attack roll. If I am casting something like a contagion spell, I can definitely see advantage in that, especially something like contagion that is going to have an effect that doesn't provide a saving throw, that just requires it a hit roll and requires a touch attack. Those kinds of things I can certainly see this being useful for. In general, I don't think that's the primary purpose here. Here's another one. Speaking of granting advantage, Invoke Duplicity also grants advantage to the Cleric, and only the Cleric, when both they and the illusion are within 5 feet of their target. So that doesn't grant advantage to any spell with an attack roll besides Inflict Wounds. Why would you get that impression? What it does is it provides advantage to you if you and your duplicate are within 5 feet of an enemy. That means any melee attack, including a melee spell attack. That includes things like spiritual weapon, that includes things like contagion, and sure, cause wounds, I suppose, too, if that's what you want to cast. Personally, I'm not a big fan of cause wounds, but there are touch spells I think are reasonably good, and this will get you advantage on casting those spells. One thing it could be used for is to attack with a ranged spell without the disadvantage that you would normally have in melee. I can see advantage to that sometimes. Again, with a cleric, I don't see that coming up a lot. This isn't really about that. Here's another complaint. Literally, all you know about the illusion is that it's perfect and distracting, with no indication of what either of those mean. Well, it means perfect and distracting. These are guidelines. This is an illusion. We should be looking at this like an illusion spell. Again, we cast Major Image. It doesn't tell us exactly how the enemy is going to respond to that. All it tells us is that we're creating an image and that it can have these properties. In this case, the property this illusion has is it looks like you. How much does it look like you? Perfectly. So, perfectly like you would suggest that it's an exact replica. I don't think that's all that confusing. How the DM responds to an exact replica illusion of your character is up to the DM. And again, some DMs might not play with that. Most DMs will. I think a DM is hard-pressed to say that if an enemy is faced with 2 images of the same character and the one that is the image is a perfect representation, that they're going to intuitively know which one to attack. I think that is playing out of character knowledge. I think it's metagaming. I don't think most DMs play that way, but some do. Some players metagame too. I don't think it's a good method of role-playing, but it is a DM prerogative. And so, sure, talk to your DM first. So my take on this is, it's okay. I mean, when I'm looking at my channel divinity, the first thing I'm thinking of is turning undead. Trickery clerics do that just like any other cleric. Does it give me another option? Sure, it gives me another option. And that option is an illusion. What am I going to use that illusion for? I'm probably going to use it to try to distract enemies into thinking that there's another version of my character out there, hoping that it might draw their attacks, hoping that it might draw the attacks that might go to some of my allies, maybe might even attract some spells. Furthermore, if I'm hidden, I wouldn't expect an enemy to know that this isn't my character, or even suspect that this isn't my character. So it's even more likely to draw those attacks or spells, especially once it starts slinging spells itself. So that's what I would use this for. I don't think it's a powerhouse. I don't think it's amazing. I think it's okay. And the thing is most of the second level channel divinity stuff for subclasses I think is okay, and I don't think it's fantastic. This is no exception, but it's certainly not the worst. So let's look at the Arcana domain. What's it bringing in at second level? As an action, you present your holy symbol, and one celestial, elemental, fey, or fiend of your choice that's in 30 feet of you must make a wisdom saving throw, or it's turned. So you can turn more stuff. That's okay. Not as good as turn undead, because you're only targeting a single creature. Furthermore, I think undead are more prolific than any of these things. Fiends are reasonably prolific. There's going to be a lot of campaigns where fiends show up, especially at higher levels. But I don't think any of these things are nearly as prolific as undead. And again, it's not as potent as turn undead because you're not hitting as many creatures. Still, this is an okay ability. Is it better than invoked duplicity? I don't think so. I think it's okay. Again, I'm not overwhelmed. I'm whelmed. So that brings us to our 6th level ability, which is Cloak of Shadows. Cloak of Shadows allows you, as an action, to turn invisible for 1 round. I guess one advantage here is that invisibility isn't going to require concentration like the spell would require, but 1 round really isn't very much. So what are the complaints? Insultingly bad. You're insulted. Wow. Invisibility for 1 turn at the cost of an action! Exclamation point. Make this a bonus action. You can use your wisdom modifier per day or something. Don't make it compete with invoked duplicity. Well, it's competing with turn undead. That's really the big thing. Again, invoked duplicity is okay. This ability is okay. I don't think it is so great that I care about being able to use it a lot. And invoked duplicity isn't so great that doing something else is a big loss. When am I going to use this? Well, I think the obvious place where you're going to use this is in place of a disengage action. If I am in melee and I need to disengage for one reason or another, this is a way I can do that. Not only am I preventing the opportunity attacks against me, I'm also making other attacks against me for that round have disadvantage. Now, I'm not going to be able to hide because I've used my action to create this ability, but because I'm invisible, I don't provoke attacks of opportunity, and attacks against me have disadvantage. Both those things are useful. Again, this is just really a disengage. It's okay. I don't dislike it, but I don't think it's a powerhouse. So let's look at the Arcana ability. Starting at 6th level, when you restore hit points to an ally with a spell of 1st level or higher, you can also end 1 spell of your choice on that creature. The level of the spell you end must be equal or lower than the level of the spell slot you use to cast the healing spell. So basically what this is it's Dispel Magic. Except instead of using your Dispel Magic spell, you're going to use a healing spell. And then the Dispel Magic kind of piggybacks. And because it's a healing spell, you'll restore a few hit points as well. That's basically it. Except unlike Dispel Magic, this is only going to work on 1 spell. Now, there's the advantage, I guess, if you want to get rid of a low-level spell, like a 1st or 2nd level spell, you could use a lower-level slot. But, again, 1st and 2nd level spells tend not to have devastating effects, so it's less necessary to use an ability like this. Usually when you want to use an ability like this, ally is hit with a devastating spell effect. You need to get rid of it. So you use this ability to get rid of that effect. Or you cast Dispel Magic. And Dispel Magic is a domain spell for both Arcana Clerics and for Trickery Clerics. They both have it. So either a Trickery Cleric or Arcana Cleric can get rid of an enemy spell effect on an ally. In fact, they can get rid of multiple enemy spell effects on an ally using a Dispel Magic spell. The only real advantage here is, number one, there's the ability to do it as a bonus action, which I think is a pretty minor advantage, honestly. And number two, that you can do it with an addition of some healing point recovery. But I don't think that's a big deal. We're not talking about, for the most part, we're not talking about spells that are going to be healing a lot of hit points. So is this better than just having Dispel Magic? Yeah, it's a little bit better than just having Dispel Magic. Not a lot better. Just like Cloak of Shadows is a little bit better than a regular Disengage. Not a lot better than a regular Disengage, but it's a little better. In both cases, I'm not overwhelmed. I'm whelmed. At 8th level, you gain the ability to infuse your weapon strikes with poison. A gift from your deity. Big old gift, eh? Once on each of your turns, when you hit a creature with a weapon attack, you can cause that attack to deal an extra 1d8 poison damage to the target. When you reach 14th level, that damage becomes 2d8. Whoop-de-woo. Who cares? 1d8 damage to a weapon strike isn't great, even if it wasn't poison. Of course, it is poison, and poison is the worst kind of damage you would want it to do. But again, go ahead and make it psychic. Go ahead and make it force. It doesn't matter. This isn't a great ability. You got to use a weapon to use it. I would say you're probably better off using a cantrip. This is level 8. Your cantrips have already scaled. If you're doing Toll the Dead, you're probably doing 2d12 damage in most cases. That's 13 damage on average. That's about as much as you can expect to do with a weapon strike, including this advantage. So I just don't see the point. So you know what? Let's just ignore it. So what do people not like about Divine Strike? Well, I don't know where to start because, of course, people hate this because it sucks. Trickery is the only domain that gets Divine Strike, a weapon feature that doesn't get a bonus armor or weapon proficiency. So what? Don't use it. Nothing PC focus should be poison-based, for too many things are immune or resistant to it. True. So don't use it. This ability sucks. I agree. So don't use it. To add insult to injury. Well, I haven't seen the injury yet. The Trickster's damage bonus is poison, which is one of the most commonly resisted damage types. No, it is the most commonly resisted damage type. It's also the damage type which most creatures are immune to. So don't use it. So what's my solution? Simple. Ignore you have this ability. Sure, if I have a cleric who's a Trickery Cleric, I probably have a dagger. I probably have a light crossbow. I may use them once in a while, and when I use them, then I'll remember that maybe I'm going to be adding another d8 of damage if the thing I'm fighting isn't immune to poison. In most cases, actually, the creature probably won't be immune to poison, because if it was immune to poison, it's very likely undead. And if it was undead, you know what I did? I turned it. So this, again, I just don't think the criticism there is focused in the right direction. The criticism should be Divine Strike is useless because it adds to weapon damage, not it's useless because it adds poison damage. But I agree it's pretty useless. Once again, the chances are that if I'm playing a cleric, I'm going to want a free hand for casting spells, not for swinging around a weapon. If I am swinging around a weapon, I probably have something like Shillelagh. If I have something like Shillelagh, then I'm going to maybe want Divine Strike. And if I'm going to have Divine Strike, I'm going to want it to be able to do types of damage that I expect not to be resisted. None of those are the case here. So really, this is the easiest complaint to circumnavigate. All we have to do is not pick up a weapon. So the Arcana Cleric, what does it get instead? Potent spellcasting. Cleric cantrips are going to be adding wisdom bonus to damage. I would expect at 8th level that's going to be a +5, at least in most cases. So if we're casting, say, Toll the Dead in combat, and the creature fails their saving throw, because if they make their saving throw, they take no damage regardless. But if they fail their saving throw, we would expect them to take, in most cases, I think we're going to get the D12s, so it would be 2d12 damage, or 13. This is going to boost that to 18. That's a significant boost. But you're doing a lot more than 13 or 18 points of damage in a round. You got to remember that this is 8th level, so we've got our spiritual weapon going. We've got our spirit guardians going. We may even be casting that spirit guardians with a 4th level slot. So our total damage of the round is much higher. That potential +5 on a failed save, which ends up being maybe on average +3 maybe, is not a huge amount. I'll take it. I'll take it. But the other thing to remember is I'm not always using a cantrip. And I'm not using a weapon either. What I'm often doing is I'm casting a spell, because I have a lot of spells now. I'm 8th level or higher. So that means more often I will be casting a spell with my action. So in that case, neither Divine Strike nor Potent Spellcasting does anything for me. Now, in the cases where I'm using a cantrip, yeah, it's going to add about 3 points of damage on average in a round. That's a minor boost. I'll take it. It's certainly better than nothing, and nothing is what we're getting with the Trickery Cleric. But let's not pretend like this is a big deal. This isn't that big a deal. We're talking about a minor boost to a minor ability that we're going to be using less and less often. And we're getting this late in the game. We've already gone 7 levels where it didn't matter whether you're using a weapon or a cantrip. Suddenly this comes into play and people think this defines whether your cleric should be using a weapon or not using a weapon. And I really think they're overestimating these abilities in general. These are okay. I'll take them. 8th level, going to give me +5 damage on cantrips. That's okay. But again, I don't expect to be using cantrips all the time, and I expect to be using them less and less as we move on. So let's talk about the Capstone. The Capstone the Trickery Cleric gets is not very good. Improved duplicity means they get extra duplicates when they use their invoked duplicity. But the thing is that's a pretty minor ability to begin with, so we take a minor ability and we make it a little bit better. It's pretty mediocre. For a 17th level ability, I think that's a schwang wang wang. Trickery Cleric I don't think holds up at 17th level compared to some of the other capstones we see. Here's a good example. The Arcana Cleric, what do they get? At 17th level, you choose 4 spells from the wizard list, 1 from each of the following levels, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. You add them to your list of domain spells. Like your other domain spells, they are always prepared and count as cleric spells for you. This can include the Wish spell. This is amazing. But I think the drawback here is pretty obvious. 17th level. Most campaigns are never going to see this level. And even campaigns that do see this level, it is a minor percentage of the total playtime. So this is a great capstone. But for the most part, I think we look at capstones far too often. I don't think we should really be even looking at capstones in most cases when we're evaluating subclasses, because this is a level of play that most of us are never going to get to in most campaigns we play in. So which one's better overall? Well, in those abilities alone, I think up to level 17, Arcana has the advantage. I really do. I think Arcana is the slightly better of the two before level 17. At level 17, it's a runaway. But between levels 1 and 16, I would take the Arcana abilities over the Trickery abilities by a small degree. But we're not done yet. We need to talk about domain spells. These are the domain spells you will get with your Arcana Cleric. Detect Magic. You probably had it already. Magic Missile. Magic Missile's okay. Magic Weapon. It's a so-so buff, and honestly, it's probably not the 2nd level spell you want to be casting. Nystel's Magic Aura. It's not good. Dispel Magic. It's a good spell. It's redundant with one of your abilities, and it is a spell that you were already going to have as a cleric. Magic Circle. Another spell that's okay, and you already could have it as a cleric. Arcane Eye. Now, Arcane Eye is a good spell. But look at this. This is a 7th level ability. So between levels 1 and 6, you didn't really get anything special with your domain spells. And now that you're 7th level, you've gotten your first really good spell, Arcane Eye, which is a good spell. Then you get Leomund's Secret Chest. Meh. Then you get Planar Binding. Eh. Then you get Teleportation Circle, which is reasonably good and useful. So what I'm seeing here is a handful of spells that are reasonably useful, a lot of so-so spells, and a couple spells that are pretty good. Overall, I'll take it. I mean, when I'm playing a cleric, you can give me any spells with the domain spells because these are extras. These are always prepared, so even if they're circumstantial, it's great to have them because when those circumstances come up, so few characters would have these spells prepared. So I get that. And I'm not saying that this is bad. This is normal. If you look at almost every domain, then you're going to find spell lists just like this one, where there's a lot of so-so spells that I'll take gladly, and a few spells that are pretty good that may or may not already be on the cleric list. So this is important because you are a spellcaster. This is what you do, more importantly than anything else. This is way more important than you being able to swing a club. This is way, way more important than you being able to turn undead. This is what you do. You're a spellcaster. And one of the chief advantages of playing a cleric is you get so many more prepared spells because of these domain spells. So the better these domain spells are, the better caster you are. And you're a cleric. How good a caster you are is everything. So at first level, what does a Trickery Cleric get? Well, they get Charm Person. And I get it. You're a Trickery Cleric. So you use Charm Person to try to manipulate people. That certainly fits into trickery as far as I'm concerned. So I understand thematically why they're giving you this spell. As for the power level, I'm not a big fan. The second one is Disguise Self. Personally, I like Disguise Self more than Charm Person. I don't think it's a powerhouse spell. I think it's okay. I certainly understand, again, why they've given it to a Trickery Cleric. It certainly fits into the idea of trickery. In terms of power, I find it is somewhat useful as a utility spell. Obviously, in combat, that's not going to have any advantage to you. So, I mean, I'll take it, but I'm not overwhelmed by that. So what are we getting at 3rd level with our 2nd level spells? Well, we're getting Mirror Image and we're getting Pass Without Trace. Wow. Wow, guys. Like, come on. Mirror Image is an amazing defensive spell. No concentration. This means you could cast this and have it at the same time as your invoked duplicity. How many different targets do we want our opponents to have to try to pick between? I think that's quite useful. And frankly, I'll take Mirror Image with any caster. And then the second one, Pass Without Trace, I discussed this in my spells videos. This is one of the best spells at 2nd level for any class. And Trickery, you're giving +10 to every member of the party for stealth. Never mind the fact that this does stack with Blessing of the Trickster, meaning there is great synchronization here. What a beautiful spell to be on your list. This alone makes this spell list better than the Arcana spell list. So then let's look at our 5th level spells. What do we get? Well, we get Blink. Blink's an okay defensive spell. Doesn't require concentration, which is always good. Do I want to be using Blink instead of Spirit Guardians? Maybe at higher levels if I have a chance to prepare. That's about it. So I'll take this spell. It's a decent spell. I don't love it, but it's okay. And then there's Dispel Magic. Dispel Magic is a good spell. I'll take it. It's already on the cleric list, so I probably would have taken it anyway. So it's basically one extra preparation, which is okay. Now let's look at our 7th level spells. What do we get? Well, we get Dimension Door. Dimension Door is a fantastic spell. One of those spells that clerics don't get this type of spell. The spells where you can move around and you can move around your allies. This is one of the big advantages of playing something like a wizard or a sorcerer, the fact that you can do this kind of thing. But clerics normally can't. Trickery clerics alone can. This is huge tactically, just massive. And now if Pass Without Trace wasn't enough, we've now taken this domain spell list and brought it to a level way above what we see with any other domain. And remember, what we're doing here is we're making our cleric better at casting spells, more versatile in their ability to cast spells, more versatile in what they can do in combat, more versatile in what they can do outside of combat, and potent. So, and being that when you're a cleric, spells are what you do, being so much better at spells is incredible. And so what do we get next? Polymorph. Okay, so now remind me again how trickery clerics are the worst. So let's go back to what people say when they're making their complaints about the trickery cleric. Keep in mind that certain other divine trickster, aka the druid, also get polymorph and Pass Without Trace. Yeah, well, first off, they don't get Dimension Door. Secondly, who cares? Yeah, but polymorph and Pass Without Trace, these are standouts on the druid spell list. These two spells are part of the reason why people play druids. But you know what druids don't get? The cleric spell list. Trickery clerics get these spells and the cleric spell list. That's the best of both worlds. I mean, if you don't want to play a cleric, then don't play a trickery cleric. Trickery clerics are clerics first and foremost. But trickery clerics get some of the best spells that are on other spell lists. And we're talking about a spell level, 4th level. This is a spell level where cleric spell list is not looking very good to begin with. But now you're going to throw the best 4th level spell in the game on there. No one can argue that the spell list isn't great. Yeah, no one can argue that the spell list isn't great, but here's what people don't get. They don't get how much better it is. They don't get how much value, how much more value they're getting from this than they're getting from any of their other abilities. Yeah, you look at the Arcana Cleric, and before level 17, they get a few decent abilities, but there is nothing that compares to having Polymorph, Dimension Door, and Mirror Image, and Pass Without Trace on your list. Not even close. This is a runaway, people. Sure, level 17, now you got Wish. Things have changed. But until then, come on. Now, it's important to point out that at higher levels, Polymorph loses its luster, right? It's a 4th level spell, and when you're casting it at 7th level, you feel like a god. And when you cast it at 10th level, it's still really useful. When you cast it at 15th level, not nearly as good. But so what? When we're talking about the levels that we play the most often, this is where the Trickery Cleric really, really excels. Now, some people have mentioned maybe Polymorph isn't a good fit for Trickery style characters. Come on, it's Polymorph. Give it to me. I don't care if it's Trickery or not. It's fantastic. You know what else is in Trickery? Turning undead. You know what else is in Trickery? Spiritual Weapon. You know what else is in Trickery? Spirit Guardians. These are amazing abilities. They're not Trickery based. Who cares? You're a cleric. You cast spells. If you can get great spells, get them. So this one I just had to share with you guys because as I was doing research for this video, I came across this quote. It's pretty ridiculous, but here it is. Worst part, if you go elf or some sort, you can grab the Zan's feat for Pass Without Trace. So what we're talking about is Wood Elf Magic. Wood Elf Magic gives you the ability to cast Pass Without Trace. It's a feat. So what this poster is suggesting is that the reason that we should ignore the fact that the Trickery Cleric gets great spells is because if you take a Wood Elf, you could take a feat, presumably at level 4, presumably instead of increasing your Wisdom score, so that you can cast Pass Without Trace. If this person believes that that's worthwhile, then how on earth could they not be falling over themselves to play Trickery Clerics every chance they could get? So that's why I think this subclass is underrated, because I think, number one, The subclass abilities that aren't spells, I think, are overrated in general. I think in general these are minor abilities. I think the Trickery Cleric's abilities are okay, except for the Divine Strike, which I think is useless. But beyond that, I think they have some use. And I don't think they're significantly worse than other classes, until maybe we get to the Capstone. But again, the Capstone isn't going to see play in most games. And then we get to spellcasting. And spellcasting, I think, is the most important thing for a cleric. This is what you do. You're a primary spellcaster. So the spells are the most important thing. Think about it this way. What's the most powerful class in the game? If you think it's the wizard, why is the wizard the most powerful class in the game? The reason they're the most powerful class in the game is because they have the best spells. Take a look at their spell list. Fantastic spell list. Do you think it's a coincidence that the class you think is the most powerful also has the best spells? No, that's the reason. So when you have a cleric subclass that has the best spells, and not just the best spells, it has many more great spells than other clerics, and at levels where they really needed those spells, we can only underestimate the potency of that. That's why I think Trickery Clerics are great, and I think they are powerful, and I think they are more powerful than other subclasses, especially at the levels where you need them to be. Level 3 through level 10 is where I really see this coming into play, where I really see those domain spells having the biggest impact. And the impact is huge. Way more impact than I would see from the ability to turn a single fiend, or the ability to cast a booming blade, or the ability to add a +5 damage to that booming blade on the off chance you actually hit. So that concludes the portion of the video where I'm going to discuss why I think the Trickery Cleric is underrated. Now let's look at what trickery means to begin with. This is what the Player's Handbook has to say about trickery. Gods of trickery, such as Tamora, Bashaba, Olidamara, the Traveler, Garl Glittergold, and Loki are mischief makers and instigators who stand as constant challenge to the accepted order among both gods and mortals. They're patrons of thieves, scoundrels, gamblers, rebels, and liberators. Their clerics are a disruptive force in the world, puncturing pride, mocking tyrants, stealing from the rich, freeing captives, and flouting hollow traditions. They prefer subterfuge, pranks, deception, and theft, rather than direct confrontation. So the first thing I'd point out here is you will never make a character that is all these things. They are pointing out various examples of specifics that you could see in a Trickery Cleric. Some Trickery Clerics are going to be instigators. Other Trickery Clerics are going to be liberators. Some are going to be thieves. Others are going to be gamblers. These are not the same thing. There is no reason to think that a Trickery Cleric must be a cleric of thievery. There is no reason to think that a cleric that worships Joaquin is going to be a liberator or going to steal from the rich. No, more likely they're going to con the rich. Well, if they're a cleric of Tamora, maybe they're just going to gamble away the money from the rich. And maybe if they're a cleric of Olidamara, then maybe they'll steal from the rich. So trickery can mean a lot of different things depending on the god you pick. Now, in terms of making a rogue-style cleric, if that is your goal, you can do it with a Trickery Cleric. What I would recommend is, number one, you want to be a Kenku. Kenkus get 2 extra skills that are thiefy kind of skills. They also get that imitation ability, which is useful in the realm of trickery, and it combines nicely with a disguise self spell. And then you're going to take a background like street urchin or criminal, and that's going to give you your thief tool proficiencies, your stealth proficiencies. So all in all, those things together make for a pretty decent rogue style cleric. You're not going to have expertise. You can use guidance to cover that to some degree. So I don't think that's a specialty of the subclass, but it can be done.